Evening, everybody. Good evening. We are very fortunate to have a full house tonight, so make friends as everyone comes in. I'm Patrick Lewis. I'm the incoming president and CEO here at the Filson Historical Society. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'd like to recognize the University of Louisville's Christina Lee Brown Envirome Institute as the sponsors for this event. Please acknowledge them. I'll turn the mic over to Dr. Ted Smith, who represents the Envirome Institute and the University of Louisville.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, good evening and welcome. It is such a pleasure to be back at the Filson again for this special series. On behalf of the Christina Lee Brown Envirome Institute, really grateful. I think we're going to need a bigger boat, a bigger room here, which is a great problem to have. We've been at this now for almost 2 years, and I actually recall being on a phone call with our next speaker about ways that he could help the Envirome Institute. And having a public lecture series is truly a special treat. It's really helpful for us at the University of Louisville to be in the community, talking about things that are relevant to the community. So tonight will be no exception to that rule. So keep our fingers crossed. We'll make it to March and we'll have our second anniversary together. And the man that made it all possible is Ambassador Theodore Sedgwick. And he is a scholar in residence with the Envirome Institute, and he is the chief curator of this series. So with no further ado, Ambassador Sedgwick.
It's a real honor to have Llewellyn join all of us because he's an extraordinary journalist and newspaper columnist and TV journalist. I've known him for 40 years. And he's actually a high school dropout from Rhodesia, or now called Zimbabwe. And he became a Time magazine correspondent stringer when he was 16 years old, I believe. And then he went on to Fleet Street in the glory days of Fleet Street. And then he went on to New York, became a writer in New York, newspaperman in New York. And then he ended up in Washington. He was the assistant editor of the Washington Post for a while. And then when he was in Washington, energy was the big thing, energy policy and all that. And so he started a publication called the Energy Daily, which became really the Bible in Washington for people, anyone interested in energy. And so then he eventually sold that. And now he does a White House Chronicle, and he also does this TV series of interviewing people along with Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And it's a fascinating, you should Google him and check into his lecture series, his interview series. In any case, just a little story. Back when we were, I know him because we had competing publications in energy in Washington back in the day. And we had a fierce competition. We were bitter enemies. And we thought it would be a good idea to have, in case one of us got run over by a truck or something, we thought it'd be a good idea to have a buy-sell agreement funded by insurance. And then one day we realized that we were incentivized to kill each other. And so if a trap door falls, I have a lot of witnesses here who will know who the perpetrator was. But seriously, energy, Llewellyn has a talent for finding these, the theme of the day. And back in the 70s, it was energy. Now it's AI. And Llewellyn, most journalists are drawn to politics or geopolitics, whatever. Llewellyn is unusual in that he's really interested in science, always has been. He follows the national labs, which all do a lot of interesting work, which nobody covers really. And so he's become a great student of AI today. So Llewellyn, we're really privileged and fortunate to have you come. And just so long as you don't kill me before the evening is over.
I am not a scientist, I am not a mathematician, and I am not an expert on artificial intelligence. But I have talked to an awful lot of scientists and experts and mathematicians, and I can tell you that it is the biggest thing to have happened in a very long time. Oddly, in this political year that is concluding now, it wasn't sufficiently considered, but it is going to change the way we work and play, how we live, and it's going to have a huge impact on our health. Now, AI is so large, it can be compared with, and it may be bigger than the arrival of the steam engine or electricity or the internet itself or computing. It has really no limits in the way it will affect human life on Earth. Sometimes for the best, and some of it is very dark and we don't know. I first became interested in what it would do to work. And those who are passionately devoted to the idea of AI tend to say, well, automation produced jobs, AI will produce jobs. We don't know that. AI tends to subtract. Whether it will eventually add, we don't know. I think it was one of the large brokerage houses said we'd have a job loss of 300 million worldwide as AI got going. But some of that panic seems to have eased off. What is happening? Well, first of all, ordinary people have taken to AI. Every one of us probably has asked it a question, has gone to ChatGPT or one of the others. And a very interesting thing where if you go into a large corporation, it may not yet have decided whether it should embrace AI, whether it should have agents, that is specially constructed programs to assist it in its mission. But the people working for these large companies are all using it all day. So if you see, all those little rabbit hutches that you see in big companies with people say they are using AI to help them in their daily work, even though the company may not yet have committed to it. I have become particularly interested in its possible application or its absolute application in medicine, pharmaceuticals, etc. Now, you can before I get into that, we should look at a few of the other negatives. It's not always reliable. It hallucinates. It's vulnerable. So-called backdoors, which some people have mentioned to me here today. I wrote an article which was fairly widely published on backdoors, which is when during machine learning, which is when you're prepping AI for a specific job, you can insert something that's wrong, evil, malware, and it stays there, a Manchurian candidate, if you will, that is activated later. This is not confined to AI. It applies to a lot of other things, sensors, for example, on bulk electric equipment. There are a lot of downsides. However, there isn't much choice in it. We're not going to send it away. We're not going to stop it. So we have to live with it and reap its benefits. And nowhere are its benefits likely to be more immediate, more complete than they will be with medicine, medical research, and generally research. But let's try to concentrate just on medical research. It has a phenomenal capacity to do efficiently what was done inefficiently previously. I was doing some work with an extraordinary man called Omar Hatemeh. He was the chief innovation officer at NASA when we started doing stuff together. And one of his concerns was how to find off-label uses for drugs. How is it that we develop a drug for one thing? Can we not use it for another? And can we do it safely? And he was setting up a think tank to look into that. And along came AI. And he became absorbed with AI. He is now the chief AI officer for NASA at the Goddard Flight Center in Maryland. And he has written an extraordinary book, which will be available very shortly. It's not been published in the US yet. And it's called This Time It's Different. And that title sums up almost everything about AI. This time it's different. It's not supercomputing. It's not a more efficient computer. It is quite different. And we do not know how it works in total. I have not found one scientist at any of the great universities, whether it's Brown or MIT or uh, 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 Berkeley, who I have interviewed, who has said that they know what happens when these neural networks start working. We have lost control of what they're doing, but we know what benefits can come from it, and we have to see how we're going to control them down the line. But if you think of the number of drugs that have been developed, tens of thousands of drugs have been developed. And when I say drugs, I mean in the totality of medical history, going back to Chinese medicine, African tribal medicine, etc. All of these things can now be examined through the AI lens and brought into play. One of the things that I like to say is that we spend too much time looking looking outside the box. It's a good idea to look inside the box and see what you've got there. The little cliche of you've got to look outside the box. Well, AI does an extraordinary job of looking inside the box. And the word which comes along, which I've written down here because I always forget it, which is an extraordinary word, acceptation, expectation. It comes from biology, and it means when something developed for one purpose is used for another. The biologists like to use as an example the wings on a bird, originally designed to keep it warm. And they found, it's quite good for flying too. And if you start using expectation as a general theory in research, you open frontiers on an enormous scale. If we can find in the drugs that we have and apply them to diseases they have never been applied to, we will find a lot of cures. I like to, as an example, use thalidomide. Thalidomide, I was a young reporter in London when it was having its big impact, and my first wife wrote a lot about it, and it was horrific. Children born without limbs, without legs, or with one arm. But it was not the right use for thalidomide. It is now a very useful drug in treating Parkinson's. This is what I think AI will do, and it will do it on steroids, as it were. We can expect to come to market very soon an awful lot of drugs that are halfway tested, where there have been clinical trials, for example, when we know the contraindications. We don't have to go through the clinical trials all over again to see what the side effects on human health of drug A are if we're using it for purpose B, so long as it's within the same containment, the same set of parameters. And that is very, very exciting. Omar Hatameh, who I mentioned a few moments ago, he predicts that a child born today, because of AI and because of its impact on medicine, can expect to live to be 120 years of age. That is an extraordinary change. There's never been a time in human history when we've been able to look to that kind of increase in life expectancy. Life expectancy has increased because we pushed back infectious disease. We know how to treat a lot more diseases, but this is a giant improvement in human expectation, and it will be because of artificial intelligence. Now, you can worry a lot about the downside, about the hallucinations. My own thought is that AI can be used to discipline AI, that in some ways AI can create its own police force its own regiment. There's a lot of talk about how we need government guardrails. It may be early. One of the downsides of what is happening today, and I've talked to people at all of the leading companies, NVIDIA, Google, etc., Microsoft, is that the companies, there's so much money at stake. $1 trillion is being invested in AI research. So much money at stake that there's a high possibility that they are terrified and they're rushing products to market prematurely. And they admit they're doing it, which is why AI can be so inaccurate sometimes. And you have to watch it. Other times it's quite extraordinary. I asked ChatGPT to answer something, and he wrote a little essay, and I thought it was as good as anything I could write, which was powerfully disturbing. One of the downsides, nothing to do with medicine, of course, is just that. And as a professor out at Berkeley, who has studied this and who thinks we should slow down a bit, says the danger is language in, language out. So the first people to suffer from AI will be lawyers, journalists, maybe teachers, and anybody who relies on the veracity of material. There will be probably, almost certainly, a sub-industry in trying to establish the veracity of things. And what is true? What can we believe in? And it's going to be very hard. We've already politically undermined our confidence in facts. Now we're going to have them further undermined because of the capacity of AI to develop fakes. A friend of mine who works for an insurance company and who gave a TED lecture on AI, he asked my permission, and so he made up a picture of the thing on the YouTube of me talking and saying things I've never said. The only way you could detect possibly that it was not me is some of the English pronunciation, the hard A's. But otherwise, it was awfully close. And unless, except for my wife, Linda, who's very good at language and, as you would imagine, knows me quite well, she can detect the failures in the fake. But if you worked hard at the fake, it would be absolutely impossible not to. But because it has a dark side, isn't a reason not to use AI. I've talked to the National Institutes of Health. They are excited about it. One of my own interests has been chronic fatigue syndrome, also known as myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is a disease of the immune system, that you are intolerant of exercise, you have dysphagia, you have lifelong pain, and you're basically under glass. You can't participate in normal life, but you don't appear sick, which creates huge social problems of parents thinking, particularly boys, might be idle, might be not trying hard enough, or marriages don't survive, other relationships don't survive. And I look at AI and I think there are a lot of data sets that can be put into this, and we may find something we don't have at the moment, and that is a biological marker. The only way you can find out, the only kind of marker you can have for this disease is to put somebody on a treadmill, and if they have to go to bed for 2 days afterwards, they probably have it. That is very unscientific and very crude. And also modern medicine doesn't allow for that sort of time interval. Osler, the great physician who created Johns Hopkins, talked about studying patients, spending time with patients. Well, it doesn't happen in modern medicine, but with AI, effectively, it does. The chances are that all of these things that would come from observation, from a lot of time talking out a disease with a physician will be done by computers, and they're getting better. I will give you an example of AI that's very simple. It's got nothing to do with medicine, but it's easy to understand, and that is travel. If you had an AI agent running your travel, and you had, with machine learning, not to be confused with AI itself, but the prepping of AI, machine learning, and given it all the parameters of your travel requirements, your budget, your time, your food allergies, your interests. Do you like to go swimming, or do you prefer to go to museums? Are you interested in local food and wine, or are you more interested in scenery? And so it might come back to you and say yeah, I've looked into it, and this would be an AI talking back to you, and you might really enjoy going to Crete. The wine is good, the food is good, but you may also find it crowded in the summer. So you might want not to go in the summer, as you've asked, or it might say, well, yeah, it's not a good idea to go to Venice. It's really over touristed, but Trieste is very nice. Would you like me to book you into Trieste? And we've got a situation, there's a company in New York called Emergence, which is developing these agents, and they're also developing a user-friendly system so that they can be handled, they can be primed conversationally. You're not going to have to sit there and type. You're going to be able to say, hey, Mr. Agent, what about this? And the agent, the set of inputs, if it's not able to answer it, it will ask another agent or a third agent. If you think of this, how it will work, say, not if you think about traffic, when we get automation, which will be AI-driven, automated cars on the highway, they will have to have an awful lot of information, but they will also have to be able to speak in real time to other cars. For example, you're barreling down the highway, and one of the great worries in preparing automated vehicles is what happens if something totally unexpected happens in the highway. You can program a child running in front, a policeman standing up, a stop sign, but can you program, say, a cow that walked into the road? This may not be something in the sensitivity of your automobile, but because it operates through an agent, it may ask other cars, what do I do about this thing in front of me? Extraordinary, but that's what we can expect with AI. When it comes to drugs, it costs between 350 million and 4.5 billion to bring a new drug to market. As a sort of back of the envelope, the drug industry says 3 billion, and about 10 to 15% of new drugs get regulatory approval. It's a very wasteful process. Clinical trials, excuse me, clinical trials are very complex. They take a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of management, and it's often clinical trials that fail to get the approval because they weren't well conducted. I know of a drug called Ampligen, which failed to get FDA approval, not because it's not effective, it's used in chronic fatigue syndrome, but because the clinical trials were poorly conducted and did not meet the standards of the reviewing committee. When you get to AI, a lot of that will be taken care of. If, for example, there has been a clinical trial of drug A, and we're now using it for disease Z, the AI will say, well, this was discovered, this is a concern, it affects the liver, it affects the, and you wouldn't want to give it to pregnant people or people over the age of 75, whatever the parameters are. So it's an amazing world in which so many considerations How does AI work? It scours all known sources, plus what has been fed in with machine learning. The problem with that is that data is biased. For example, one of the great data banks, which will help enormously, is the National Health Service in England, which has been keeping data on sick people since 1947 or 48. It is a treasure trove of data, but it's biased. It's white people of a certain type living in a certain environment with a certain background, a certain diet. And these are the biases that are in data. And one of the challenges is to eradicate the bias or to take it out or to allow for it, to compensate for the bias. I did not do this myself, but a friend of mine said, show me a picture of a doctor, and it was a white man with a stethoscope. Show me a picture of a nurse, and it was a black woman with a stethoscope. This shows you the inherent bias in the system, that this is its immediate conclusion. Nonetheless, these things can be allowed for. Two of the most exciting people I've talked to in my research are out at the University of California, San Francisco. And one of them, Alice Tang, has done a huge amount of work. They both have actually the other girl, it's in the Sarota laboratory, and I forget her name, but Marina Sarota. They are working on Alzheimer's, and we can now predict up to 80% who will get Alzheimer's. This is very interesting. They have found that, of course, and this is known, more women get Alzheimer's than men. Doesn't mean men don't, but it's a smaller percentage. Actually, that's also true of chronic fatigue syndrome. Smaller number of men, but men do get it. Alzheimer's, men get it. But women who suffer from osteoporosis earlier have a 75% chance of getting Alzheimer's. This is predictive medicine. This is AI in its predictive mode. Now, this is pretty useful. This is very good to a point. It also introduces huge anxiety. If you know that you have a 75% chance of getting Alzheimer's because you had a battle with osteoporosis, bone density, etc., you're not going to be very happy knowing that you're going to get Alzheimer's. We're all going to die, but we don't actually want to know when. And I'm not going to tell Todd. The predictive medicine, which is one of the big advantages of AI, has with it this downside of anxiety. We know a lot about predictive medicine, and we can predict and will be able to predict. Google has been able to map essentially all the proteins in the body, which gives us a huge chance of understanding what diseases may occur, what will carry us off, or at least make us very ill. This is not, though, necessarily happy. You do not want to know that at age 57 you might get cancer, or that you may lose your mind at 85, which is my age. I'm concerned about that. The predictive aspect of AI is fascinating because it will make us able to counter these diseases. It will introduce anxiety, but it also will introduce the possibility that we can take corrective action. For example, if you find a particular environmental reality is creating a disease, which AI will identify far better than anything we've used so far, you can take a corrective action. If, for example, it's something in the air or something in the water or a radiation of some kind. That is the hope, that you can use the predictive capacity of AI The other one is simply in the treatment of patients. When you get a situation where you can talk colloquially to the computer, where you can talk to AI and say, you know, I got an awful pain in my knee today. And the AI would say, well, how old are you? What do you weigh? Did you play rugby when you were little, or whatever? And will come up very close to the same conclusion that your doctor would, maybe better, because it will be able to ask 1,000 sources what to do about an arthritic knee or a knee that isn't operating well. The ability to interface, of the patient to interface with AI, is going to radically change, for example, the looming shortage of doctors. We all know there's a shortage of doctors, even though we brain drain a lot of doctors from the third world into the first world. There still is a shortage of doctors, and a giant shortage in Africa and Latin America and Asia. With AI, we can really do a lot to eradicate the need for doctors for many, many things. Indeed, the time will come, I predict, when AI will have the authority and the ability to recommend a medicine. And then it'll be up to the pharmacist or maybe to a supervising physician to authorize that, to actually issue the prescription. But in 50 years, I think AI will be writing and authorizing the prescription itself, and it will be effective. The problems are there. Anything that's evolving has problems. And of course, we have the challenge of how do we keep the bad actors out? How do we stop the back doors being abused? How do we stop the malware from distorting the result of our research? But the thing you have to know is that you are not going to get rid of AI. You cannot elect not to have it, not to use it. You can personally, but you know the great expression of Leon Trotsky, who said, you may not be interested in the dialectic, but the dialectic is interested in you, which is mostly expressed as you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. So I would say you may not be interested in AI, but AI is interested in you. You are a source of data. You yourself are a data set, and everything about you will contribute as it's fed in, and you won't know when it's fed in. It might be fed in with facial recognition. It might be your medical records, your dental records, applications you've made. Sad thing is, I think that privacy as we've known it is basically over. And that's an entirely different subject. AI will exacerbate that, but you don't need AI to realize that privacy is really endangered. And with drones, with the amount of information on ourselves, which is around, and we've just had, almost every week we get a data breach. I think that the future of AI is going to make us healthier. It's going to unburden a lot of the burden on the medical system. It's going to remove a lot of the drudgery of medical diagnosis, because it'll do it quicker and faster. And then there is also how it will be used. It's already being used in surgery, because AI-directed scalpel can be more accurate, more sensitive, and more reliable than a surgeon's hand. It can be absolutely programmed not only to do the job, but also to stop if something untoward is happening. It is beginning to change surgery. You couple that with 3D printing, and we're printing body parts and inserting them. This is the future of medicine. It is technological, it's exciting, it has a dark side, as does AI, as do computers. very little that we invent does not have a dark side if it is misused. But the only thing I can think of that's a major, major invention that did not have a dark side was electricity. Nobody's been able to make a weapon of it, or particularly to abuse it, which is interesting. But AI is certainly vulnerable to abuse, to excess. The companies developing it are in need of some kind of oversight. It's not clear. There's a bill before the Senate, which it seems to me to be very vague. It hasn't been enacted into law, but it would be a beginning. But you don't want to regulate too early. You don't want to, throttle this child with regulation too early. And of course, you have the international competition with China. And I would like to mention this because I think we should know it. If in my research, and this has included many conferences, including one in Spain, conversations, television interviews, etc., a great majority of the people at the cutting edge of AI are from Asia. I went up to MIT for a conference, and I looked around a sea of Asian faces, largely women. There were obviously Anglos there, or Europeans. You can't tell by looking at them. But it was very interesting to see the role that creative Asian entrepreneurs are playing in the AI space. And I personally am quite proud that the #2 man in AI at Google is an African from Zimbabwe. I think I've touched on most of my points, and I'd be very happy to endeavor to answer any questions. Ted, go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you for a great talk. It's amazing. You do that just looking at one note one time.
One word I can't remember.
Well, I mean,
ever.
I wish I was in your position.
My wife wrote it down for me.
So good.
It's a great word.
So I was wondering if we could bring it back to the beginning. It's my understanding that these AI models are currently limited by two things: content and getting enough training content. And the other one is energy. And I guess I'm curious, since you started in energy, if you might talk a little bit about the energy requirements.
Okay, those are very good questions, Ted. Yes, it is limited. It's limited by the data available and the data sets that are available. And as time goes on, data, which some people say is the new gold, is going to get more and more important because all the keys to everything are in the data. And that's vitally important. We will be limited by the data. What I do think is where the data is available, for example, in old medicines, and I include all medicines going back to so-called primitive medicine, including the most modern medicines, that data is known. Every disease is not known, or every environmental impact is not known. And you've got the bias that the data tends to have been accumulated in the first world, in the white world, and not so much in Asia, but that's going to change very quickly. The use of energy is huge. It takes 10 times more energy to answer a question on ChatGPT than it does on Google, the standard old Google. And it is upending the electric supply situation in this country and across the world. The largest residents of data centers, these great consuming electric, is in Virginia. The giant buildings full of endless servers. And it is a challenge However, it is a challenge which will be met because it can be engineered down, not out, but down. And that is, for example, we may see a move from air cooling, using air conditioning to cool them, to water cooling, which will reduce the amount of electricity. And at least one company, I heard a wonderful conversation, Linda and I were in Spain for this meeting. The young woman who had been at NVIDIA, but now had transferred over to Nippon technology, and they're working on photon chips, which would change everything because you wouldn't have the heat. You'd be using light, not electricity, and you wouldn't have the heat resistance. New chips are less resistant. They're also being designed for the purpose that they're required for. So rather than having a general chip, you would have a very specific chip which will use less electricity. But about 2 to 4% of the electric demand between now and the end of next year may come from data centers. I talk in my other interests to a lot of electric utilities, and well, they love data centers because it's reliable, easy to serve customer that pays the bill on time. On the other hand, it's hard to generate the power. And an interesting thing about the electric utilities is they have no capacity to say no. If you build a house and you want electricity, you call up the electric company and they provide it. That's part of a social contract, a compact, essentially established in 1935. Danny Boggs here, am I right about that? Where's Judge Boggs? Anyway, so they keep providing power. We're going to have severe power shortages in the next several years, maybe starting this winter, maybe next summer. A lot depends on weather, but it is a very large concern for AI at the moment. And as AI is galloping ahead, so is its huge impact on electric supply. I think that you will find that people who work at the Filson are already using AI to look up all sorts of things in the course of their research. It may not be an official policy, but it's in practice. AI is the stage beyond computing. It is when a semi-autonomous product is created out of a computer, but do not think it is like a computer product. It is the creation of a neural network, which is the same thing that you have in your brain. And these neural networks, and we don't understand how they work, talk to each other, etc. 10 years ago, Stephen Hawking said, and it frightened people, that it would be the end of civilization. A friend of mine who is retired head of computer science at Brown University in Rhode Island, he gave me a detail going back 25 years history of AI. But it was just 2 years ago when ChatGPT was released that most of us became aware of it. I had been somewhat aware of it because of my interest in medical diagnosis and treatments using things that have been developed for one purpose for another purpose, but I certainly didn't have any substantial understanding of it. I'm not sure I do yet. I talk to a lot of people. Let me tell you one thing, and Ted raised the question of electricity. You could, of course, bring AI to a halt, stop it altogether if you turned off the electricity, but that price might be too high for a society. It's a pretty essential commodity. So we're going to go ahead as we are, using a lot of electricity, a lot of AI, and as with any evolving technology, it will get better. one of the questions that I've asked, and I get two different answers. Not everybody's in agreement. One is, if you hand over a function to AI, can you get it back? And one expert told me no. And another one said, of course you can. So it's still an evolving world. And there hasn't been a full exchange of ideas. There have not yet been really years of education in AI. The universities are playing catch up, as they always do. It's just inevitable. Teaching AI, learning about AI. One of the concerns is, of course, what are the Chinese doing with it? And what will it do to the military? One person who was most at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, told me that he was most concerned about backdoors and concerned that, his name is Derek Revron, that they were concerned that the military would prematurely use AI to operate systems without knowing what back doors had been opened. And the example that was given was, if you have a drone and you release it from an aircraft to go and hit another aircraft, if it has been subject to malware through a back door, it might turn around and hit the host aircraft. And it might do a U-turn, which would be very dangerous. We do know that there's a huge amount of effort put into AI in Russia and especially in China, and we don't know the full consequences. We don't know how that will impact us. We don't know how it will be used in military terms. It seems to me that maybe our old military posture with, say, battle groups and aircraft carriers surrounded with a flotilla of other ships may be obsolete. It may not be what we need anymore. We're seeing extraordinary uses of AI in Ukraine with drones. And we've seen amazing use by Israel, particularly doing some really fantastic, frightening things, utilizing, as far as we know, AI. The blowing up of cell phones was one example, which I believe had a large AI component and which was quite, so.
Been talking about some of its benefits for human beings, but listening to this, it sounds to me like that AI might eventually get to the point where they would wonder, why should we put up with these human beings?
Well, that is a very interesting point. AI is too new to make that decision, or even to think that. We're not going to stop it, but that assumes that this thing has motive. So far, we've never seen motive. We give motive to AI. We tell AI we don't want this vehicle to hit that vehicle in the street. That is its instruction. But it hasn't yet, that we know of, had a human motive, a human type of motive, like I want to run the world, or I think that's a little too far. I also think that it is such a comprehensive technology, it will be possible for it to teach it to discipline itself. And when technology is new, it's very dangerous to worry about all the parameters. Worry about what it is you're doing now. I'd like to use Kitty Hawk as an example. When the Wright brothers took off, their multi-dimensional control was established, basically ailerons, they were not standing there worrying about, oh my God, what will happen in 50 years when these things will be going at 600 miles an hour full of people. That would have worried them too much, or they would not have foreseen the development of collateral support systems like high tensile alloys, radio, radar, air traffic control as is practiced. There's a limit to the purpose of standing at the initiation of a technology to worry about what it will be like when it comes to fruition. You have to proceed with what you have. You're not going to stop it. You're not going to say, we will not do AI. It is, as I said, paraphrasing Trotsky, AI, you may not be interested in AI, but AI is interested in you, and it already affects a lot of aspects of your life that you may not know, like maybe your electric bill or your traffic lights. And if it hasn't already, it will. It is a great new tool. It's hugely exciting. It may be that mankind is absolutely on a new threshold. If you think what happened in the last 150 years, when, unless you were very wealthy, you weren't likely to get more than about 100 miles from the village you were born in. You would marry somebody there, and that was how you lived. Mobility came with the steam engine and people getting on trains, and then it escalated. And again, the same invention anxiety certainly attended cars. Remember, they had somebody walking with a red flag in front of an automobile. So you shouldn't worry too much about that. The thing is to get it right now and to get the benefits, get the longer life, push back the diseases, get the efficiencies, and find out what it is that's making us sick and stop doing it or eradicate it.
All right, we've got plenty of questions, but time for one more before we need to break. I'll let you choose.
I have to consult my AI. It has told me this gentleman here. I don't know. I think it's getting better. I think a lot of the problem was because the AI real estate is so attractive to these companies. They put $1 trillion into it. And an interesting thing is they don't have a business plan yet to how to get money out of it. With computers to this point, advertising, and drained all the advertising out of newspapers and magazines and television. But there is no reliable business plan to how to do it. But the real estate is seen as being so valuable that Google, which for a while looked as though it would be left behind, suddenly is catching up. Microsoft is maybe on the cutting edge. It is fiercely competitive, and then there's, there are a bunch of companies all scrambling, some of whom you've never heard of, like Emergence, which I went to interview in New York. They're not going to do something revolutionary, but they're going to create some revolutionary agents. For example, an agent that would run a government department. So Elon Musk would not have to go around firing people. I tend to be optimistic. I tend to think that one would better be optimistic because it's here and it's not going away. And two, it is redolent with possibilities for good, as well as having a dark side. And so is everything else. So are airplanes. What do you think about the helicopter? Is it a war machine that has killed thousands, or has it saved thousands of lives? Every day, helicopters save lives. In wars, they take lives. Is that a reason not to have helicopters? So I don't think there's any point in being worried about it. I think you have to understand it. You have to use it, know where to use it. And you've got to, just like the cell phone, you've got to get used to it. I'm slave to my cell phone, and I bet you all are too. I mean, the idea that you're carrying a phone with you. When I was a young reporter, a phone was something that you had to negotiate. When you went to a court case or something, you had to run around the local houses and say, please, could I use your phone in an hour? Now we carry phones with us, with upsides and downsides, but more upsides. We're in a very exciting place. The human race has a possibility of doing things it has never done before. And I think you have to bear that in mind. And worrying about what might go wrong is pretty pointless because it's going to go on. Poor old Ned Ludd, you mean? Yeah. He broke the weaving mills. Yeah. Well, it doesn't work. And you're not going to break this. Because if you don't do it, somebody else will do it. If we don't do it in the US, and we have a lead now, and we probably could keep the lead, largely because of the rigidity in Chinese society under the current regime. And innovation and rigidity don't work well together. We still have the flexibility, and we are attracting talent. So let's not be rude to immigrants. I don't say that because I'm an immigrant, but that too. They're bringing in the talent, and they're bringing it from all over the world. It is a great time in the human experience. Enjoy it, prosper. Cheers.
Thank you.